My grandpa left everything to me. The estate, the business, the legacy. At least, that's what he told me. But the day after his funeral, I sat in a cold office while some stranger read a will that gave it all to my sister. I wasn't just left out. I was erased. No one would explain why. My mom said I was being dramatic. My sister acted like it was no big deal. But I knew something was wrong, and I was going to uncover the truth no matter what it took. Stick around. You won't believe what they did to cover it up. The room was silent. The kind of silence that swallows breath. Polished mahogany chairs creaked as we sat in a tight semicircle around the lawyer's desk. Grandpa's funeral had ended barely an hour ago, and now we were here, already dividing. What was left of him? I sat straight, hands folded, heart heavy but steady. Grandpa had made it clear. Everything would come to me. We'd talked about it more than once. I had spent years helping him manage the estate, visiting him every week, learning the business from the inside. Chloe, my younger sister, had barely shown up, unless there was something to gain or photograph for Instagram. The lawyer, Mr. Ethan Crane, adjusted his tie and cleared his throat with a smoothness that felt rehearsed. He held up a thick envelope, opened it slowly, and began to read. Per the final will and testament of Jonathan Blake, the following designations are to be made. The entirety of the Blake estate, including the primary residence, investment accounts, and business holdings are to be passed to. He paused. Chloe Marie Blake. I blinked. There was a sharp ringing in my ears, like the world had gone underwater. What? I breathed, barely audible. Chloe let out a soft, polite gasp and brought her hand to her chest like she was shocked, but I saw the smirk flicker across her lips. My mother, Margot, reached over to squeeze her hand, her expression unreadable. Neither of them looked at me. I think there's a mistake, I said, louder now. That's not possible. Grandpa told me himself. Mr. Crane cut in. This is the will dated 6 weeks before Mr. Blake's passing. It is properly signed and witnessed. Legally, it is binding. 6 weeks ago? That was when Margot suddenly told me Grandpa wasn't feeling well enough for visitors. When every call I made went straight to voicemail. When Chloe started showing up to family dinners without warning. A chill ran through me. I'm sorry, the lawyer said flatly, already folding the document away. Chloe gave me a small smile, almost pitying. I guess Grandpa had a change of heart. Margot leaned back in her chair, composed, as if she'd known all along. Of course she had. I looked between them, feeling my skin prickle, my throat tighten. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I didn't know how they did it yet. But I knew one thing for sure. That was never Grandpa's real will. I sat alone in my car outside the law office, fingers clenching the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The words kept echoing in my head. The entirety of the Blake estate to Chloe Marie Blake. 6 weeks before Grandpa died. That was the date on the will. 6 weeks. That was when everything had changed without me realizing it. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. This legacy is yours to protect. Jenna, Grandpa had told me one quiet afternoon, just the two of us on the back porch. The air had smelled like freshly cut grass and lemon tea, his favorite. Not because you deserve it more, but because you understand it more. I'd laughed nervously back then, brushing off the weight of his words, but he wasn't joking. His gaze was steady, full of that quiet trust only he ever gave me. Weeks later, he stopped answering my texts. My calls went straight to voicemail. Mom told me he wasn't feeling well. He's resting a lot, she'd said over the phone. He doesn't want visitors right now. At the time, I believed her. She was his daughter, after all. I didn't want to seem pushy. I thought I was being respectful. Now I knew better. Back in my apartment, I paced the living room as I replayed the entire scene in my mind. Ethan Crane. That name didn't ring any bells. Grandpa had used the same lawyer for decades, Thomas Berger, a friend from his army days. A man who once told me he'd draft the final version of the will personally. When the time came. Why? Wasn't he there? I pulled out my laptop and searched for public filings. Ethan Crane was a real lawyer, but had only registered his independent practice in the last 2 years. No public connections to my grandfather, but plenty of tagged social photos with Chloe. Of course. I scrolled through more posts, my eyes narrowing. Dinner at a fancy restaurant, a yacht trip with friends of the family. And in one group shot, I spotted both witnesses who signed the will, names listed on the documents I'd glimpsed in Crane's office. They weren't neutral parties. They were Margot's wine night buddies. One of them had been at Chloe's graduation party. There was no video will either. No record of Grandpa reading it aloud. No final words captured like we had talked about doing together. Just paper. And signatures from people who had every reason to play along. I called Mom. I couldn't help myself. Margot speaking. Why wasn't I allowed to see Grandpa in his final weeks? A beat of silence. He didn't want visitors. You were. Always so busy with work, he didn't want to burden you. I laughed bitterly. That's what you're going with? You think this is easy for me, Jenna? Her voice shifted into faux concern. He made a decision, one you clearly don't agree with, but it was his choice. He told Ethan what he wanted, and he wanted Chloe to have a chance. You mean, you wanted Chloe to have a chance? Click. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, stunned, not just by her cruelty, but by how quickly she cut me off. As if I wasn't just out of the will. I was out of the family. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the fact that they'd erased me. Like I didn't exist. Like Grandpa had never loved me at all. But I knew the truth. And I wasn't going to let them bury it. The next morning, I drove straight to the office of Thomas Berger, Grandpa's longtime attorney, and someone I hadn't seen since the funeral. He opened the door himself, still tall and sharp despite his 70 years. His eyes widened when he saw me. Jenna, he said with a tone that sounded almost guilty. I was wondering when you'd come. He invited me in, offered me tea. I didn't have time for pleasantries. I need to know something, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Did Grandpa ever change his will? Thomas blinked. Not that I'm aware of. He left everything to Chloe. That's what the new lawyer said. He sat down heavily behind his desk. That's not what Jonathan intended. He pulled open a drawer, rifled through a stack of folders, then stopped on one labeled Blake. J. Inside was a printed will, signed, witnessed, and dated 3 months before Grandpa's death. Everything. To me. I was going to contact the family, but the day after he passed, I was informed by Mr. Crane that a newer will had been filed. He frowned. That didn't sit right with me. Do you still have a digital copy? He nodded slowly. Backed up to secure cloud storage. Jonathan wanted redundancy, said if anything ever smelled off, you'd come looking. God, Grandpa. You knew. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the document. It felt like I was holding a weapon, because now I had proof. Real proof. But paper wasn't enough. I needed someone who had been there. That's when I remembered Daniel Royce, Grandpa's former chief of operations. He had worked with him for over 25 years, retired only a year ago. I found him at his lake house just outside the city. The second I mentioned what had happened, his face darkened. He told me he was worried, Daniel said, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Your mother started hovering. Chloe, too. People stopped calling him directly. They filtered everything through her. Did he ever mention a new will? No, quite the opposite. He was proud he'd finally locked everything in. Leaned forward. Jonathan made me promise. If anything shady ever happened, I'd help you. That's when he pulled out an encrypted USB drive. He gave this to me 2 months before he died, Daniel said. Told me not to open it unless you came to me directly. We plugged it into his laptop. Inside was a scanned copy of the will, time-stamped, plus a video of Grandpa himself, sitting in his favorite chair, reading the terms aloud. His voice was a little shaky, but his words were crystal clear. This is my final and only will. I leave everything to my granddaughter, Jenna Blake, no one else. It was like hearing his voice for the first time in weeks, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Daniel's jaw tightened. You've got them now. But I didn't just want justice. I wanted exposure. That night, I drafted a cryptic tweet on my locked personal account. Funny how Grandpa's final will vanished the moment he passed. Even funnier how the beneficiaries just happened to be the people who blocked me from seeing him for weeks. I didn't tag anyone. Didn't mention names, but my account had some followers. Mostly college friends, a few old colleagues from Grandpa's foundation. Within hours, the post had over 8,000 likes. The next morning, I woke up to a DM from an anonymous account. I'm an editor. I know who you are. I know what your family did. If you want the story told, I'll protect your identity. Let's talk. We talked. 3 days later, a story dropped on an independent media blog under the headline, ERASED, the silent battle over the Blake family fortune. It didn't name Margot or Chloe directly, but the details were unmistakable. The suspicious timing of the will, the new lawyer with family ties, the cut-off communication in Grandpa's final days. The post exploded. By noon, it had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. One of Grandpa's business partners commented publicly, Jonathan Blake was a man of honor. If there's fraud involved, it needs to be investigated. Suddenly, my mother was making calls. I didn't answer. Chloe posted a photo on Instagram of her crying with the caption, "People can be so cruel. Family is supposed to support each other, not attack." She turned off comments within the hour. Daniel called me the next morning. Margot's in full damage control, he said. She's calling board members, lawyers, even reporters. They're trying to silence this. I exhaled slowly, staring at Grandpa's scanned signature on the screen. They can try, I said, but it's too late. The world knows, and I'm just getting started. The hearing was held in one of the city's private equity trust chambers. Mahogany panels, gold trim, and enough pressure in the air to make even billionaires sweat. But I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. The room was full. A few board members from Grandpa's foundation were present, seated along the side. The lawyer panel sat elevated like judges, and directly across from me were Margot and Chloe. Chloe looked radiant in cream-colored silk, like she was there to receive an award. My mother wore a sharp navy suit, her expression a perfect blend of concern and disappointment, directed entirely at me. As the committee settled, the lead trust officer, a woman named Judith Chen, tapped her gavel lightly. We're here to review the legitimacy of the most recent will submitted on behalf of the late Jonathan Blake, as well as consider evidence brought forward by Ms. Jenna Blake regarding alleged misconduct. Margot stood immediately. Before we begin, I'd like to say that this entire situation is deeply upsetting. Jenna has always struggled with control issues, and grief affects people differently. Chloe chimed in, a delicate tremble in her voice. We never wanted this to be public. We've tried to support her, but she's been unstable. Gaslighting 101. I let them speak. I wanted them to dig their grave. When they finished, I stood, calm, collected. I loved my grandfather. He trusted me with his legacy. He made that clear to everyone who knew him. And more importantly, he put it in writing. Until someone decided that wasn't convenient. Judith nodded. You've submitted a counterclaim with digital evidence. Please proceed. I clicked a remote. A large screen lit up behind me. Slide 1, a scanned PDF of the original will, dated 3 months before Grandpa's death, complete with secure metadata and digital timestamp. Slide 2, a video of Grandpa reading the will, aloud, his voice steady, his words direct, his eyes clear as ever. Murmurs rippled through the room. Slide 3, a recorded phone call, audio playing through the speakers. My mother's voice, unmistakable. Ethan, just handle it. The old man doesn't know what day it is. We'll make sure Jenna's distracted. Chloe will sign anything you put in front of her. A gasp escaped from someone in the crowd. Slide 4, bank statements, showing multiple deposits made to Ethan Crane's personal account in the weeks leading up to the new will's submission. Each marked with vague descriptions like consultation and bonus. I turned to the panel. Your Honor, this isn't just manipulation, it's fraud. My grandfather was coherent, intentional, and targeted. They didn't just cut me out of his will, they cut him out of his final decision. Margot was on her feet. That audio could be fake. Deepfakes exist. Judith held up a hand. The audio has already been independently verified by forensic analysts, along with the transaction records. Chloe finally broke. You bitch! She screamed across the room. You think just because he liked you more, you're entitled to everything? I was his granddaughter, too. You were his project, I said quietly. I was his partner. Judith banged her gavel. That's enough. We've seen sufficient evidence. This panel finds the contested will, dated 6 weeks prior to Mr. Blake's passing, invalid due to fraudulent influence. The previous will, dated 3 months prior, is hereby reinstated. The room erupted in whispers. Margot's eyes locked. Onto mine, her face taut with fury. You'll regret this, she hissed under her breath as she gathered her purse. You just made yourself a powerful enemy. I met her glare evenly. No, I said. I just made peace with the truth. Chloe stormed out, shoving past reporters who had gathered outside the doors. Flashbulbs exploded, microphones stretched, toward me. Jenna, how did you discover the fraud? Will you press charges against your own family? I didn't answer. But as I walked past the media frenzy and into the sunlight outside the chamber, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, weightless, vindicated, free. The house was quiet again. Not empty, just peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Blake estate, casting soft golden light across the marble floors and dark oak furniture Grandpa had so carefully chosen. His scent still lingered, in corners, old books, cedar, and the faintest trace of bergamot from the cologne he used every day until the end. I stood in the doorway of his study, the very room where he taught me how to read balance sheets and spot a weak handshake. The leather chair still faced the window overlooking the garden he planted himself. I hadn't moved it. I didn't want to replace him. I just wanted to honor him. 3 weeks had passed since the trust hearing. The media frenzy had died down. Ethan Crane had been disbarred. My mother and Chloe had gone silent. No more threats, no more Instagram posts. Just silence. And I welcomed it. I didn't hate them anymore. That would have been too easy. Too heavy. What they did, what they tried to steal wasn't just money. It was identity, memory, legacy. But they failed. I had taken a portion of the inheritance and donated it to the Veterans Scholarship Fund Grandpa had always wanted to expand. The new building would bear his name, and every young mind that passed through it would know who made their future possible. Not because he was rich, but because he gave a damn. I didn't attend the ribbon cutting. I didn't need applause. The satisfaction was knowing that somewhere, Grandpa was proud. On my way out of the study, I paused by the fireplace. Framed photos lined the mantel. One was of me and Grandpa fishing, both of us squinting into the sun, holding up a single soggy trout and laughing like fools. Chloe had never liked fishing. That photo had been missing the day I moved back in. I'd found it, days later, shoved in the back of a drawer in Chloe's old room. Like they'd tried to hide it, like they wanted to erase every trace of what he and I had shared. But they couldn't. Not really. I gently returned the photo to the center of the mantel and stepped back, letting it stand exactly where it belonged. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of history and home. They tried to erase me from his legacy, but Grandpa didn't leave me his wealth. He left me the wisdom to protect it. And I did.